Formula One finds itself at a crossroads that few have predicted just 5 years ago. After over a decade of committing to the most complex, expensive, and arguably misunderstood power units in the history of internal combustion engines, the sport is seriously entertaining a U-turn. We aren't talking about a simple nostalgia trip though. This isn't a case of dusting off the blueprints from 2013 and calling it a day. Instead, the paddock is buzzing with a proposal for an entirely new, high-revving, sustainable fuel V8 hybrid. But for a sport that has staked its entire road relevance reputation on the V6 turbo hybrid, this isn't just a technical change. It is a seismic shift in philosophy. It forces us to ask the difficult question, why would F1 walk away from a technology it spent billions to perfect? And if they do, what does the future actually sound and look like? To understand why F1 is even having this conversation, you have to look at the data, and more importantly, the visceral experience of being trackside. Stefano Domenicali hasn't been shy about the sport's internal research. The numbers are staggering. An overwhelming majority of fans, both new and old, want the old sound back. Sound in Formula One isn't just a byproduct of speed, it's an emotional anchor. The old V8 screamed at roughly 145 decibels. Crucially, they peaked at a frequency range that human hearing is biologically tuned to find the most intense. When hybrids debuted in 2014, that volume plummeted by around 11 decibels. Now, on paper, that might sound a small adjustment, but sound is measured on a logarithmic scale. In a real-world perception, the cars essentially became half as loud overnight. We've heard the legends talk about this. Lewis Hamilton often reminisces about standing at Spa as a child and feeling the vibrations of Michael Schumacher's Ferrari resonate throughout the entire body. Even drivers like Charles Leclerc, who never actually competed in the V8 era, have admitted that acoustic loss is the one thing they miss most about the classic era. When the drivers and the data are in total alignment, the commercial pressure to act becomes impossible to ignore. Beyond the noise, there is the brutal reality of the balance sheet. The current power units are marvels of engineering, but they are also financial black holes. We are looking at hundreds of millions of dollars per manufacturer, which they spend per year just in research and development. The problem with this level of complexity is that it doesn't just cost money, it distorts the competitive landscape. If you get the initial architecture right, like Mercedes did in 2014, you can build an advantage so insurmountable that it kills the sporting aspect of competition for nearly a decade. Conversely, if you get it wrong, as Honda did in 2015, it can take half a decade of public embarrassment before you can even see the podium. Simpler technology has a natural tendency to compress the field. During the V8 era, we saw 4 different world champions in 4 years. In the first decade of the hybrid era, we essentially saw 2. F1 management is beginning to realize that the more complex the engine, the more predictable the Sunday afternoon. When F1 made the jump to hybrids in 2014, the buzzword was relevance. The automotive world was pivoting toward electrification, and manufacturers needed to justify their racing budgets to boards of directors by proving the tech would end up in a road car. But the world in 2026 looks very different. Formula One has committed 100% sustainable carbon-neutral fuels. This is the smoking gun that changes the entire argument. Once the fuel itself is carbon neutral, the actual architecture of the engine, whether it's a V6 or a V8 or a V10, becomes environmentally irrelevant. A V8 running on green fuel has the same carbon footprint as a V6 hybrid. The environmental shame that forced F1 into small capacity hybrids has been neutralized by chemical engineering. Suddenly, F1 has a clean conscience and a commercial case to bring back the roar. However, this is where politics gets messy. While F1 management and fans are pushing for the V8, the manufacturers are pushing back. They aren't doing it out of spite, they're doing it because of the R&D justification loop. For a company like Honda, the only reason they are back for 2026 is the electrification aspect. Their president has been very clear. They are in F1 to develop the hybrid systems that will power their next generation of road cars. A V8 with a token hybrid system doesn't give them that platform. And we have to remember, Honda has walked away from this sport twice in 20 years. They aren't afraid to pull the plug if the relevant story disappears. Then, on the other hand, there's Audi. They spent years building the entire F1 structure from the ground up, specifically for the 2026 hybrid regulations. Every engineer they've hired and facility they've built is oriented around that specific V6 turbo hybrid formula. To tell them now that the goalposts are moving back to a V8 is a massive bitter pill to swallow. But there's a nuance to this that most people are missing. The world has shifted under these manufacturers' feet the last 24 months. When the 2026 regulations were first drafted, the world was in an EV fever. Since then, governments have rolled back EV mandates, key markets have slowed, and the automotive balance sheets are under extreme pressure. Several manufacturers have reportedly told the FIA the world has changed. No one wants to be the executive who tells their board they are funding two parallel engine programs, perfecting the 2026 V6 while simultaneously developing a 2031 V8. It's an enormous financial ask at a time when the global economy is looking increasingly fragile. So what's the actual proposal? To understand the new V8, you have to understand the failure points of the 2026 engine. The 2026 unit is a 50-50 power split between the combustion and electric. The V6 makes about 536 horsepower, and the MGUK adds another 470. The smoking gun issue here is the battery. It can only store so much energy. During a lap, if a driver used the electric boost, the battery derates or runs dry. When that happens, they go into harvesting mode, backing off on the straights just to recharge. This creates a terrifying speed differential, sometimes as much as 50 kilometers an hour between a car with a full battery and one that's charging. It is a safety risk, and frankly, it's not the flat-out racing fans would expect from F1. The 2031 proposal addresses this by flipping the script. We are looking at a 2.4-liter V8 pushing around 880 horsepower, revving to around 16,000 RPM. But the hybrid component would shrink dramatically, moving to a 50-50 power split to something like 90-10 or 70-30. In this world, the electric motors become a push-to-pass boost tool rather than the core part of propulsion. Energy management as a complex lap-long strategy effectively vanishes because the battery is so much smaller. This allows the cars itself to shrink. F1 is targeting a weight reduction of about 118 kg, mostly by ripping out its massive batteries and the heavy cooling systems required to keep them from melting. It is a recipe for a car that is faster, louder, and significantly nimble. There is one detail that will determine if this feels like a true return to form. The current proposal is for a 2.4-liter V8 with or without a turbo. It sounds like a minor technicality, but it's pretty much everything. A turbocharger works by using exhaust pressure to spin a turbine. The process acts like a muffler, absorbing high-frequency edge of the engine note. A naturally aspirated engine, on the other hand, breathes freely. At 16,000 RPM, the exhaust pulses hit the air at exactly the frequency that produces that spine-tingling scream of the early 2000s. Toto Wolff has described the vision naturally aspirated, high-revving, and sustainable. If F1 chooses the turbo for power density, they might get the V8 back, but they won't truly get the sound back. The shift to a lighter car changes the fundamental feel of racing. Current F1 cars are often criticized by drivers for feeling like boats or tanks, which are heavy or sluggish in slow corners and punishing on tires. By removing over 100 kilograms, you change the relationship between the driver and the road. A lighter car responds instantly to a direction change. It loads the tires more cleanly. It rewards bravery in a way a heavy battery-managed car simply cannot. This is about returning the agency to the driver. Instead of managing a computer-calculated energy deployment strategy, the driver is once again in charge of the pace. History tells us when you can simplify the engine, you close the gap between the front and the back of the grid. When the technology is complex, the manufacturer with the biggest R&D budget always wins. By standardizing more components and capping the cost even further, with a proposed 30% reduction on top of the current engine cap, F1 is trying trying to ensure that a team like Williams or McLaren isn't permanently held back by an engine deficit. We saw it in the V8 era. The engines were so similar in performance that the championship was decided by aero and driver skill. That was the Goldilocks zone F1 was trying to discover. So what's actually going to happen? The roadmap points to 2031. This is significant because the current governance agreement, which is the contract that gives manufacturers a say in the rules, expires at the end of 2030. Right now, the manufacturers hold a veto, but from 2031, that power shifts back to the FIA. If the 2026 season ends up being a fuel-saving, battery-managing disaster, the pressure to switch will become immense. You've already seen the first cracks in the wall. Toto Wolff, the man who built Mercedes' hybrid empire and called the V8 idea a joke only months ago, is now calling it the best consensus. The F1 CEO has the data, the drivers have the desire, the fans have the passion, and the only thing left is the negotiation over how much the old world needs to stay to keep the manufacturers happy. Formula 1 spent 10 years building the most advanced engines in the world, but they might have finally realized that being the most advanced doesn't matter if you've lost the soul of the sport. The next 2 years will decide if F1 is brave enough to listen to its own heart and its own exhaust pipes.